right. Yes, it doesn't matter whether you turn to the left or you turn to the right. They are the goon squads, and they're coming to town. So let's get into it, everybody. You saw the chalkboard, and this is what is going to lead things off as we dive into this very large, unfortunate Persian Gulf problem. It's a sea of problems, and they are coming along. I hope you've got your swimming wings, because Scotty Bessent is completely mystified. If this is not a very, very scary sign, either he's acting and thinks he can pull it out and people will believe him, or he's actually this clueless. Bessent is mystified regarding energy prices. Let me show you this. That's right. Dropsite News reports Brent crude breaks $94 as Trump threatens increased economic pressure. It surged as high as $94.60 a barrel today, its highest level since June 24th, before pulling back below 93. Oil has now risen for 5 straight sessions as traders price in tighter Middle East circles because they can't get the stuff. And let me show you what CNN is doing to try to evidently help the Trump administration, amazingly. But first, let's talk about Scotty Bessent.
In a thinly traded market, I think, I'm confident that bonds will continue declining. We've got a spike in oil prices today that I don't really understand. Our announcement is for economic action, and I think that the economic action will mean that oil prices will come down sooner.
What's your reaction?
Utterly, it's disaster. It's just, I feel like I'm back at one of the sessions I used to have on economics for the Institute for Humane Studies. We talk about like free market economics and stuff like that. And, I would be sitting there talking to people and we just sit there like, I just don't understand these people. It's this crazy mindset that they kicked everything off for the PNAC campaign for a new American century, topple all these governments, get all these things, do it for Israel, for the Greater Israel Project. And now let's hear a little more of the sentiment. Yeah, this is how we started things off at the news notes over at my, of course, genetically superior paid subscriber, Gardner Goldsmith Substack, if you want to get in there. Free on Sundays, every Monday through Friday. This is what we offer to the paid subscribers, the news notes. And we're opening it off with this. News editors oft tell journalists that they should start with the personal, then get into the abstract and statistical. So let's poke fun at that. I usually skipped the opening of news articles just for that reason, so I could actually skip the personal stuff that didn't really pertain and get to the meat of the information. And we're going to look at, in this case, Israel's #1 rump swab, Mike Huckabee. This is a story we, and likely you, saw the other day, but it is worth reiterating and using as a way to show us how unbalanced so many statists are. The problem is not necessarily that Mike Huckabee keeps flacking for a genocide machine. That is obviously vile. But on a more subtle level, Huckabee's assumed place to, quote, represent all of Americans, end quote, on any front, well, that is a perennially unethical and misguided sign of hubristic statist thinking. So let's head over to Megatron. You might have seen this one. And sure, he was just jesting. There are only 16 million Jews in the whole world. Put that in perspective. That's 0.05% of the world's population. So if the Jewish people representing a tiny, tiny minority, well, let's just hear him say it, shall we?
Okay, Israel is a population of just under 10 million people. 8 million of them are Jews. That's half the Jews in the entire world. There are only 16 million Jews in the whole world. Put that in perspective, that's 0.05% of the world's population, not 0.5, 0.05% of the world's population. So if the Jewish people representing a tiny, tiny minority are so good that they are taking over the whole world, the banking system, the entertainment world, the military, science, if they're doing all of that with that few people, maybe we ought to hand over the keys. Now somebody will say, "Oh, there he goes. He's now voting for the Jews to take over." I say that tongue in cheek because on its face, it's absurd to think
It's ridiculous.
that is what's happening here. But what I would say to them is, if you hate the Jewish people, take a good look.
Okay, so let's just ask a quick question. Has anybody seen the inordinate influence that AIPAC has on Congress? Has anybody seen what the United States has done over the past 30 years in the Middle East, oftentimes at Israel's request, whether it be Ronald Reagan in Lebanon finally leaving, or it be the battles against Iraq, it be taking out Assad, whatever it might be? Please, Mike, seriously? Again, you're a guy who denies genocide. If you want to deny the inordinate influence of Israel in the United States while you praise Israel constantly, while you take my money to somehow represent me, how about we just start at the most basic ethics of it? You don't represent me. You have no right to represent me. You have no ethical prerogative to claim that you represent me. And you certainly have no friggin' ethical capacity to be earning a penny off of me, the indentured servant slave. Meanwhile, we've got this breaking story confirmed. Trump tried to bribe the head of the IRGC. This just out. Pepe Escobar and Larry Johnson got the scoop.
Pepe Escobar, welcome here, my dear friend.
Thank you.
Let's begin with the breaking news. Did President Trump attempt to bribe the head of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps?
Yes, it is. And it is a bombshell, Judge. And Larry and I got confirmation and reconfirmation earlier this week. We've been on this since Monday. And yesterday we did a show together where we reconfirmed and then we exposed it for the first time, the mechanism. Basically, this was a back channel opened by Tulsi Gabbard in May, so 3 months ago, under orders of Trump and J.D. Vance. It was via Nirshivan Barzani, the president of the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq. And this was a channel specifically to contact Ahmad Vahidi, the commander-in-chief of the IRGC. So this channel was dormant. Nothing happened in May. But the channel was there, was established. Nothing much happened for 3 months. But then a few days ago, Trump reactivated the channel, once again via Barzani in Erbil. There was a secure line connecting the US to Barzani in Erbil. And once again, targeting Vahidi. And that's when the story enters Tom Clancy territory, in fact. Trump wanted to bribe Vahidi to the tune, according to our source, of billions of dollars, playing Brit-style, copied from the Roman Empire, divide and rule, to break the IRGC from the inside. The problem is Vahidi, obviously, he said, not only he said totally no, because this is against the Shiite code of ethics, of morals, of Shiite resistance, you name it. But also he told the people in charge in Iran. Don't forget that he's not the second or the third most powerful man in Iran. The second most powerful is Moshe Rezai, who was also before that, during the Iran-Iraq war, for instance, he was the commander of the IRGC. And he is now the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and personal representative of the Supreme Leader. So this made all the rounds at the top levels of the Iranian government. And at the office of Mojtaba Khamenei, one of the components of his tight circle was authorized to pass this information to the Pakistani mediators. And this reached Asim Munir in Pakistan, the field marshal, who Trump calls almost every day, trying to find an off-ramp for him. And that's how we learned the whole thing. So the source, it could not be more unimpeachable, is straight from the office of leader Mojtaba Khamenei. So this is how it works.
So there you go. And it's just unbelievable and good for the Iranians to get the word out to the Pakistanis. We'll give you more on that tomorrow. And of course, you can check out the judge's channel. We've got a lot more segments from the judge and many, many others stored up tonight. And don't forget, in about 20 minutes or so, Eric Peters will be joining us to discuss some of these stories and the madness of King Trump. Let's get back to this. King Trump. Trump continues the immoral, unconstitutional, and only significant because it will boomerang rhetoric and purported policy of trying to economically strangle Iran. Iran is in charge of the strait, and Iran and Oman are making arrangements for the mostly Iranian-controlled strait traffic. Trump's actions already saw a response from his victims that has shut down most of the world's supply of oil, natural gas, helium, hydrogen, and numerous forms of fertilizer and many other products. He's going to collapse the U.S., Canadian, and European economies. Of course, the BRICS might be slightly insulated. Australia likely will collapse as well because the government attacked the coal industry there for decades, and they are heavily reliant on imported fuel now. So let's go to this because it's clearly a lie. President Trump on Iran, the strait is open. A lot of boats are coming through. People aren't reporting that. The naval blockade has been extremely effective. We're going to see what happens. I said, this is so clearly false. It blows my mind that anyone will stand near him. I saw Antiwar retweeted that. Thanks, Antiwar.
Well, we have things that we could sanction. We have very draconian sanctions, and we'll see what happens. Right now, the strait is open. A lot of boats are coming through. People aren't reporting that, and that may slow down a little bit at some point. But right now, a lot of boats are coming through.
All right, so let's put the lie to that because that got a little bit of support from CNN. So I'm going to hop over to this and show you Saeed Marandi. This is a valuable retort by Saeed Marandi of this unbalanced CNN support of Donald Trump.
21.
Iran controls the strait, and we're trying in the United States to gain more control. It seems that there's been a little bit of a turning point over the last few weeks. 80% of traffic that's going along this Omani route, this is really important because Iran had been for a long time controlling this route that's right along the Iranian coast. They said that we want a toll or you need to register with us. What we found, though, is that over the last 2 weeks, an increasing amount of traffic is going around the Omani route. And this means that even though Iran says we are going to bombard these ships, which they have dozens of ships with attacks, they're still willing to take the risk on that green route. And the reason is because the United States military is there and they're letting ships shuttle in and out. If this route is the one that's protected and ships are actually able to come out through that route, then now we're starting to see a little bit more oil come out. That's really important for leverage.
Okay, so let's just mention, before we go to Professor Saeed Mohammed Marandi, let's just mention what probably is going through your mind and what's going through my mind compared to what, and also, what are you saying, how much more over time? So let's get into this and discuss the fact that also Iran and Oman are working together. They are coming up with their own arrangements. But watch this.
Oil might be coming out, but a resolution, that seems farther away.
If I ask Pepe Escobar what he thinks about that, he'll say the U.S. blockade leaks.
Like a diaper.
What do you say?
Well, it's misleading. First of all, the amount is very limited, and remember, there were like 130 to 170 ships that would go through every day, large ships, and that has declined to a trickle. So that means it's not just crude oil; it is the refined fuels that are in short supply across the world now. It was sulfur, it was helium, it was LNG, all sorts of products that are now the world is in desperate need of, but which are in short supply, and that the supplies are getting less and less as time goes by. And those are going to have a much longer term effect, and people don't see that the problems that are being brought about as easily as they do when there's short supplies of oil, where like gasoline prices go up and so on. But those ships, those are not large ships, as I said before. Two types of ships pass through. One are ships that, well, three. One are the ships that go through the Iranian corridor. They have Iranian permission. They're friends of Iran, or they are countries that didn't have anything to do with the war. They can go through the northern corridor, the corridor alongside Iran.
Do they pay a fee?
I don't think that there's an official fee right now. They may have something may be happening, but Iran hasn't declared anything.
Okay.
But the second type of ship are ships that want to leave, and Iran doesn't have a problem with them leaving, but they're afraid to use the Iranian corridor because they're afraid that the Americans will punish them. So in some instances, the Iranians let them go alongside to further south, if as long as the water is deep enough. The third are the ships that I explained. Iran does strike those ships, but it doesn't strike them as often as it could. It's not because the Americans are protecting them. It's because there is an agreement of sorts that sometimes that agreement expands, sometimes something happens and that agreement becomes less effective. So these little ships shuttle back and forth with small loads, and they take those loads and then they unload them onto other ships, and then they go back. So that is not going to, that is, and then of course Iran gets something in return. Let's say the Emirates wants these ships to get through, and then the Iranians say, well, you have to do this in return for us. So it's a sort of fee in itself in a certain way. So it's not as if the US Navy is there and the Iranians are incapable. If the Iranians want to shut the Strait of Hormuz, they can knock out those ships, they can knock out those ports. We've seen how Iranian missiles and drones work. But it's a very complicated situation. Iran's relationship with each and every country in the Persian Gulf has its own characteristics. And
so that's where I'll pause it there. And that's a much more realistic assessment of this. And again, I'll mention this, and I've mentioned it a couple times each week. The traffic is about 1/10 per day of what the traffic normally is going through there for whatever people think should be carried. I want to get into the economic side of this, because what Scott Bessent has been doing on the economic side is just an absolute disaster. And unfortunately, we're going to be seeing a lot more problems coming up very, very soon. So let's get into it. The U.S. economy right here. It looks like Bessent and his attempt to manipulate the U.S. Treasury market already is facing the reality, as we mentioned yesterday, that the U.S. debt is going to undermine the current rates of return. People know the dollar will be worth less in 10 years or 30 years, so they demand higher rates. Bessent thought that he could buy a bunch of long-term bonds and keep the rates low. Nope. So at 8:15 yesterday, the 10-year note yield was trading at 4.68%, according to the Gobisi letter, when the U.S. Treasury announced it would be increasing bond buybacks to $4 billion. The yield then fell to a low of 4.63% as the U.S. Treasury pledged to provide liquidity support. Exactly 24 hours later, guess what? That's right. The 10-year note yield went back above levels seen prior to the announcement and went up to 4.71%. Now, if this isn't sort of your game and you're interested in other stuff, maybe, your gun rights is your thing, or, abortion or whatever, right? For a lot of people, this is because they've got investments and so on and so forth. So, I might be talking their language. I don't know. But I come at it from the economics instruction lecturing standpoint. And what Bessent did, what he did yesterday, or the two past couple days, was a signal. That is the signal, everybody. Again, I wrote about the coming impending disaster in 2006 because you could see it was coming. It is coming. Get ready. It's coming. There is a storm on the horizon. This is inevitable. There is no way to escape this. It's going to take a lot more intervention to tame this beast. So if it's going to take a lot more intervention, what's going to happen to the dollar? Of course, I said, as we work on the news notes today, Bessent just announced a doubling of what he did the other day. This is, as Muse would say, unsustainable. Let's see if we can get a little of that Muse unsustainable action from the band. And by the way, they are on tour because they're awesome. Album, The Second Law, of course, the second law of thermodynamics. But in this case, they were talking about how many of the technocrats see humanity as unsustainable. But what is unsustainable is actually this sort of government policy. The Treasury announced while we were working today that it will at least double its liquidity support buybacks. Where are they getting this money? By, of course, issuing new debt. Again, it's an internal Ponzi scheme because they've got the central bank monopoly that they licensed. So the Treasury is going to double its liquidity support buybacks for 10 to 30-year bonds, raising the maximum from $2 billion to at least $4 billion per operation from September 9th through November 4th. Yields dropped sharply by 9 to 10 basis points right afterwards, and gold surged over 3%. And Bitcoin futures rose amid the relief rally. And guess what? Critics call it, of course, debt reshuffling that swaps cheaper long-term bonds for pricier short-term ones as national debt tops $40 trillion with daily interest of $3.8 billion. So let's get to this. Check it out, my friends. The U.S. Treasury just admitted the economy is collapsing. Today, the Treasury doubled its buybacks of long-dated debt from $2 to $4 billion per operation, and they're going to do it through to the election. Read that again. America is buying back its own bonds because nobody else wants them. The 30-year hit 5.337% on Tuesday, highest since 2007. This is not the Fed that did this. Warsh refuses to lower rates like Trump wants him to because it's a long-term crime against your own people. Thus, he is still fighting inflation, and he is not coming to save the bubble. It's going to burst. So the Treasury is trying to do it. I put in trying, but it's not QE. It's not quantitative easing because it's not coming from the Fed. The Treasury has to fund every single buyback by issuing, just as we said the other night, more debt. They're not fixing the core problem. Bessent is refinancing it onto a shorter fuse. The same thing already happened in Japan. Washington and Tokyo burned $10 billion defending the yen. $10 billion. And it only lasted 2 weeks. The yen, again, you've got to watch The Talons of Weng Chiang from Doctor Who. This is exactly what they were talking about in that, with Lee Seng Chang and Magnus Greel, the bad guy. Japan holds the treasuries. If the yen breaks, Japan sells. That is the only reason Washington ever cared about the yen. And China is already done selling. Their treasury holdings just hit an 18-year low while they had been buying gold nonstop for 3 years. Now, this is just a video of Bessent. There's no actual audio to this. So I'm going to go back from that comely man and get into a little more major information here. The Treasury, yes, buyback, you got it. A lot more, $4 billion. The Kobisa letters got it. And I want to give you more. Mario Nawfal, U.S. national debt is now roughly the same size as its entire economy. It just crossed $40 trillion after adding another $3 trillion in a single year. And I've got this. Douglas McGregor is spot on about this Bessent fakery. The U.S. debt is unsustainable. The interest on the debt will exceed the military budget each year, and the U.S. spending on war and other massive tentacles of the Leviathan has to be cut. My preference would be no state, no U.S. government demanding people send it cash. But before we go into that, let me give you some of this data. As the U.S. economy gets slammed, interest on the $40 trillion debt is over $1.4 trillion a year. And here is the U.S. deficit each month just for this year from the U.S. Treasury's monthly Treasury statement. You can look it up, NewsGuard. Figures are in billions of dollars adjusted for the calendar and timing shifts. January, deficit, $94.6 billion. February, deficit, $307.5 billion. Some of that was offloaded from January. March, deficit, $164.1 billion. April, surplus, $215 billion. May, deficit, $292.6 billion. June, deficit, $120.3 billion. July, deficit, $432.3 billion. Mixed into that is the demand that the United States start paying back some of the tariffs that it stole from people. Let's go to McGregor and hear this, and then let's get our Mind Meld guest, Eric Peters, to talk about this and other aspects of the madness of King Don.
Colonel, yesterday the federal government's debt reached 40 trillion. It wasn't a surprise. We could all see it coming. I thought it would come a little later, but it came yesterday. Earlier in the week, the Secretary of the Treasury announced that the United States government would be buying back its bonds, essentially repaying the loans for people who had loaned it money. So many people lined up to have their loans repaid that the government didn't have the cash with which to do it. So is the government now going to borrow money in order to pay back borrowed money? If the answer to that is yes, this is no way to run a railroad.
Well, we've been running this railroad the wrong way for decades. And our sovereign national debt has practically doubled just in the last 10 years. So we need to stop and think about that. Talk about reckless spending. The problem, Judge, is as follows. Bessent decided to step in and buy these long-term bonds at 30 years because he was interested not just in suppressing the yields, that is the rate of return. He also wanted to ensure that the 10-year yield went down. The 10-year is very sensitive. It is really the bellwether of imminent destruction. And so he acted on this, and he was confident that this would be well received in the markets. It wasn't. And what's happened is that people are literally saying, we don't believe you. We don't trust the federal government. We don't trust the United States. We can't believe in you anymore. So if you want us to give you any money, you're going to have to let these yields rise naturally. And guess what the yield did? It rose.
Yeah.
We thought he was suppressing it. No, it rose. Why is that? Because the Treasury and the Fed are not in control. They're not controlling anything anymore. So what's the next step? And that's what everybody's asking. And unfortunately, I think we're going to print a lot of money.
Yeah, both yields rose. The 10, but the 10 stunned him. The 30, he knew it was going to go up. Wow.
Yeah, and look, this is bad news. You hit 5%. There's no one that disagrees out there with the notion that once you're over 5% on the 10-year, you're going to collapse financially because you cannot service the debt. That's an impossibility.
Right.
This whole scheme of borrowing in order to maintain a much higher standard of living than we are earning with what our economy puts out, which is one problem, is ending. There's another problem. It's the reckless spending on everything else. Look at what we're doing in the war against a supposed enemy that is not an existential threat. And quite frankly, I disagree. I don't think Iran is an enemy of the United States, nor does it need to be.
Well stated. Well stated. You know what would be pretty cool is if Scott Bessent had bothered to read this by Henry Hazlitt. Again, this is first edition paperback. It's the hardcover's worth like $8,000 or something now. And the paperback's worth like $10. But This, again, as Muse said, it's unsustainable. And that guy on the screen right there, he's got absolutely no clue. He's got no clue. That what they just did, everybody, that they pulled the trigger. It has been pulled. There's no going back. It's going to collapse. It's coming. It's happening now. There's no way that they can get anything back from this. It's going down. The only thing that they could possibly do is if they got peace in Iran and they were able to open up the straits and pull all those soldiers out of there, and Trump was able to claim a victory, then they would get a psychological bump before the elections. But then what's going to happen after that? Then you're going to see all the Democrats winning a lot of the votes, and you're going to see a metastasizing of the welfare state. Again, two wings of the same predatory bird, the state. You're never going to win, even if you think you're going to get control.